The River Trent is quiet now, a ribbon of silver slicing through the fields of Lincolnshire. But close your eyes, and you can still hear the roar of 1,000 voices, the clank of blacksmiths, and the low, constant hum of an entire army in winter quarters. You stand on the muddy banks of what was, for one harrowing season, a massive temporary city, Torxy, 872 AD. Here, the great heathen army, having torn the spine out of Anglo-Saxon England for 7 brutal years, paused. They sought refuge, rest, and a place to count the vast, stolen wealth of a fragmented kingdom. This was not just a military camp, it was a sprawling, mercantile hub, a temporary nexus of violence, commerce, and human tragedy where power was absolute and life was measured in ounces of silver. This video is created for educational and historical purposes. It examines themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. What does a conqueror's winter camp leave behind? Not just axes and broken shields. Archaeologists digging here, across the 26 hectares north of the modern village, found something far more chilling than battle relic. They found commerce, over 300 coins, English pennies mingled with Carolingian silver, and over 100 Arabic dirhams, pieces of silver currency that had traveled the vast, dangerous rivers of the east. These dirhams were meticulously cut into halves and quarters, confirming a bullion economy where metal, not denomination, was currency. You can pick up one of the Islamic lead weights recovered from the site, balanced perfectly for measuring that chopped silver. It is a tangible link between a temporary camp on the Trent and the glittering markets of Baghdad and Constantinople. But the trade routes carried more than silver. They carried people. The objects recovered are domestic. Fishing weights for the Trent, needles and awls for leather work, over 300 lead gaming pieces, and scattered throughout the 6 fields, the telltale sign of female labor, dozens of spindle whirls. The spindle whirls confirm women were present, manufacturing textiles at scale. Wool production was vital for the sails of the expanding Viking fleet. But the artifacts themselves cannot whisper the key question. Were these free women, wives, and companions who traveled willingly, or were they something else? The ground holds the physical proof of their labor, but the moral status of that labor is buried deeper, requiring us to consult the bones, the legal codes, and the terrifying words of eyewitnesses. The risk inherent in the Viking age was not merely the loss of territory, it was the loss of personhood. Slavery, or thrall status, was not incidental to the Viking economy, it was its engine. Historical chronicles from northern European monasteries, often written by the very people targeted, speak of raids where women and girls were carried off in great numbers. The Annals of Ulster from 821 record Vikings plundering Ayr near Dublin and seizing a great number of women into captivity. Imagine the terror of being seized, transported, and defined as cargo. The National Museum of Denmark confirms that slaves were among the most important commodities traded by Vikings, acquired primarily in the British Isles and Eastern Europe. These human bodies were moved through extensive networks mapped by 10th century Arab geographers like Ibn Hawqal, whose accounts traced the slave routes stretching from Spain across the Mediterranean. The stakes were existential. Once defined as a thrall, a person lost all legal standing. Icelandic legal codes, like the Grágis, Grey Goose laws, written later but reflecting Viking customs, state plainly that a thrall could not marry, own property, or testify in court. An owner could punish a slave as much as he wished. Physical and sexual abuse was unrestricted. The thrall was legally equivalent to livestock that could speak. This systemic erasure of humanity is the context in which we must interpret the silence of the spindle whirls at Torxy. When the army settles, who performs the labor? Who maintains the massive, temporary infrastructure of this 26-hectare encampment? The answer is clear: the unfree. The very word slave is derived from the Slavic peoples, targeted heavily in the east. The Vikings systematized this trade, making it central to their wealth generation. 10 years later, the consequences of this trade would be encoded in the very genetics of a new nation. Genetic studies of Iceland's founding population reveal that while the paternal lines are overwhelmingly Scandinavian, around 80%, the maternal lines are over 60% Gaelic, tracing back to Ireland and Scotland. The math is simple, and the tragedy is stark. Viking men settled the island, but the majority of the original female settlers were captive. Raid booty. Archaeology provides the material evidence, but to understand the lived horror, we must turn to the written word, a primary source that cuts through centuries of romantic myth. In 922, far to the east, along the Volga River, a highly educated Arab diplomat from Baghdad, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, encountered a group of Norse traders, whom he called the Rus. Ibn Fadlan was accustomed to the sophistication of the Islamic Golden Age. His account is clinical, shocked, and unsparing. Ibn Fadlan recorded what he witnessed in his travel manuscript, the Risala. He describes the Rus as impressive physical specimens, tall and strong, but their social customs horrified him. Specifically, he wrote about the treatment of captive women. He observed men engaging in sexual intercourse with slave girls openly in the trading camp, with companions watching or carrying on nearby. There was no embarrassment, no privacy, no prohibition. The National Museum of Denmark references this account directly, stating plainly that the slaves' bodies were available for sexual exploitation. This is not historical implication or modern conjecture. It is a direct statement based on a contemporary, objective observer. The women transported along the trade arteries, like those who spun wool at Torxy, were entirely subject to the will of their owners. Ibn Fadlan's testimony includes an even darker spectacle, the elaborate funeral of a Viking chieftain on the Volga. A young slave girl volunteered, or was forced to volunteer, to accompany her master into death. Before the ritual sacrifice, she was subjected to ritualistic sexual abuse by 6 men inside the funeral pavilion, as companions looked on. The girl was then laid beside her master. A woman, ominously called the Angel of Death, placed a rope around the girl's neck. While 2 men strangled her with the rope, the Angel of Death repeatedly thrust a dagger between the girl's ribs. The diplomat recorded the scream, followed by the silence. Ibn Fadlan, a man from a city of 500,000, wrote what he saw without embellishment, providing a window into a culture where the ownership of human life was absolute, and the final act could be a screaming sacrifice. The violence was not reserved for ritual. It was a common mechanism of control and termination. We move now from the written word to the ultimate, silent testimony, the bones. In Scandinavia, archaeologists have examined graves assumed to belong to thralls, and the findings are consistent and profoundly disturbing. In graves across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, sites like Grimstad in the Stockholm area and Flakstad in Norway, archaeologists found individuals buried without grave goods or treasure, unlike the high-status warriors beside them. Crucially, these thralls often showed signs of severe abuse and, frequently, decapitation. They were sacrificed to accompany their masters. The skeletal analysis performed by researchers like Anna Kellström showed wounds that were unhealed, injuries that occurred immediately before or at the moment of death, not earlier in battle or life. The head was separated from the body. The burial was disorderly, a testament to execution rather than a respected burial. The high-ranking man was buried with his weapons and status symbols. His companion was buried without a head, without dignity. Furthermore, isotope analysis, which measures strontium absorbed through food and water and stored in teeth and bones, revealed the origins of these individuals. While some were definitively from foreign lands, confirming the import of captives, a surprising number showed little difference from local groups. This confirmed that slavery was also internal, a self-reproducing system where children born to slave mothers remained slaves, even if the father was the master. The chemistry of the bones also betrayed their status. Some skeletons of presumed slaves showed diets heavily reliant on fish, while their masters consumed meat and dairy. They may have had basic sustenance, but the bone chemistry confirms their lower status in the household. Bones do not show psychological terror, nor do they record the daily beatings and exploitation, but they do record the ultimate act of power, the moment of execution. The iron collars pulled from Irish soil, the hacked silver measured with Islamic weights at Torxy, the genetic footprint of Gaelic women in Iceland, and the decapitated skeletons in Norwegian soil, all layers of evidence building a single, cohesive picture of a sophisticated, transatlantic economy powered by the trade and exploitation of human life. The glamour of the longship and the saga fades when confronted by the physical reality of the thrall. The camp at Torxy was temporary. It was dissolved, the army moved on, and within a few generations, many Vikings settled, becoming farmers, traders, and eventual Christians. Yet, the system they perfected persisted. The trade routes continued to flow, and the legal concept of human ownership remained in Scandinavia until the 13th century, long after the Great Raids ceased. The infrastructure of cruelty outlasted the raiders themselves. We have counted the spindle whirls and the gaming pieces, mapped the vast extent of the camp, and read the horrified words of the diplomat from Baghdad. The question of the women at Torxy, whether they were free or bound, is resolved not by a single artifact, but by the overwhelming, global pattern of Viking society. They were masters of terrain, navigation, and commerce, and integral to that commerce was the mastery of other people. Some were freed. The runestone at Horning, Jutland, thanks a master for granting freedom to the craftsman Torxy. This was possible, but it was a gift of the master's choice, not a right the thrall could claim. The rare moments of clemency stand as tiny islands in an ocean of systemic brutality, proving that the individual could be rescued, but the system itself remained hungry. The archaeological tools of today, isotope analysis, chemical tracing, and mapping the artifact distributions, have pulled the history of slavery from the margins of scholarship and placed it at the center. We can no longer celebrate the Viking Age for its exploration and craftsmanship without confronting the full weight of the economy that funded it, the system that required one human being to be the absolute property of another. The paradox lingers, a civilization that produced stunning poetry, navigated uncharted oceans, and laid the foundations for vast, enduring cities also meticulously calculated the value of a person in chopped silver, subjected them to unimaginable violations, and often ended their life with a rope and a dagger. The tragedy of the past is not that people suffered, but that human genius and ambition so often require, and justify, the absolute crushing of human dignity. If this story made you reflect on how easily power turns to cruelty, stay with us. Subscribe for the next chapter from the darker corners of human history. The evidence is on the ground, in the genes, and in the forgotten words of witnesses. We continue to dig, to measure, and to read, because the history of who we were is essential to understanding who we might yet become.